This is a High Desert News special report with your host, Jimmy.
From Fox News, Supreme Court rules on legality of Trump National Guard deployment to Chicago. The Supreme Court rejected the Trump administration's request to allow the president to proceed with immediately deploying National Guard troops to Chicago, delivering a blow, if temporary, to President Donald Trump as he seeks to expand his federalization push across the U.S. The justices declined the Trump administration's emergency request to overturn the ruling by U.S. District Judge April Perry that had blocked the deployment of troops. An appeals court also had refused to step in. The Supreme Court took more than 2 months to act. 3 justices, Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Neil Gorsuch, publicly dissented. The outcome is a rare Supreme Court setback for Trump, who had won repeated victories in emergency appeals since he took office again in January. The update comes from the Trump administration asked that the High Court last week to stay a lower court order blocking Trump from immediately deploying federalized National Guard troops to Chicago. U.S. Solicitor General D. John Sauer argued in administration's appeal to the Supreme Court that the federal judge's earlier order, as well as the partial stay granted by a unanimous Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, quote, improperly impinges on the president's authority and needlessly endangers federal and personal property, end quote. Blocking the deployment of National Guard troops, Sauer argued, risks, quote, jeopardizing the lives and safety of DHS officers, end quote, and prevents officials from taking what he argued are, quote, reasonable and lawful measures, end quote, to protect the federal agents from the, quote, violent resistance, end quote, that they argue has persisted in Chicago. Lawyers for the Illinois and Chicago disputed contention, however, they argued in Supreme Court filing of their own that the Trump administration's arguments rest on mischaracterizations of the factual record of the lower court's views of the legal principles, end quote. They also cited the lower court judge's order, which found the administration's declarations about the nature of the protests in Chicago and nearby Broadview were, quote, unreliable, end quote, and overstated the violence and difficulties officers faced enforcing the law. Quote, as the district court found, state and local law enforcement officers have handled isolated protest activities in Illinois, and there is no credible evidence to the contrary, end quote. Lawyers of the state of Illinois said Monday, the update comes as Trump has sought to deploy hundreds of National Guard troops to a growing list of Democratic-led cities, despite stated opposition from the local and state leaders. He has faced opposition from a handful of federal courts, including U.S. District Judge Carlin Immerget, a Trump appointee who described Trump's actions in a restraining order this month as, quote, untethered and to reality, end quote, and failing to reflect the situation on the ground. A 3-judge panel from the Ninth Circuit later stayed her order, allowing Trump to proceed with his deployment to Portland. In D.C., a federal judge on Friday will hear updates on the status of Trump's National Guard deployments in D.C. after the city's attorney general said in a new court filing that it appears the National Guard troops will remain deployed through at least summer of 2026. It is unclear whether that is the Trump administration's plan, and if so, how many of the 2,500 National Guard troops originally sent to D.C. in August would remain in the national capital through that state. Jimmy, High Desert Research News, High Desert Research Channel. From Fox News.
This has been a High Desert News special report from the High Desert Research Channel with your host, Jimmy.